Now we're live. Oh, let's put that down. Apparently it's not even working. It's coming from somewhere else, but who cares? Hi everyone, welcome to the monthly mystical. Check me out with my groovy music. How are we all this evening? Are we doing good? I'm excited, absolutely. This is going to be a good one tonight. We've got Mr. Steve, and he's going to be doing more brilliant stuff. Cult of Isis tonight. So, we'll just get on, shall we? How are we doing? Right. Let me get rid of the music. It's cool though, right? I'll do a fade out. Just wait for a couple of people to pop on. I do like the music though, it's cool. Makes me sound good, like a DJ. I would have been really crap at DJing, wouldn't I? Although I might make a few people laugh, hey. Right, let's go. Let's put that back on. Haha. And Steve's just figured out how to do that. That's marvellous. Okay, so let's welcome to the stage. We're not going to babble on forever like I did last time. Let's just get on with it. Okay, let's add to the stage Mr. Steve Mitchell. Oh, no, I nearly got rid of him. Here we go.
There you go. Hey! Excellent. Nice to see you again.
Again.
Fourth week running this is.
It is the fourth week running. It's like you're in my house.
4 weeks out of a 3-parter talk.
Yes, exactly.
There you go.
So,
Madness.
I'm excited for this evening's one more than the other two, I have to say.
You think so?
Okay. Well, I think so. Only because, like, I'm really quite into the Egyptian stuff, and I like the goddesses and stuff. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing a bit about.
What I'm really hoping is that this will be a kind of mind-blowing third talk, really. A bit kind of like the Da Vinci Code meets the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, except they were actually both the same thing, but that's another story. So, yes, it's revelation time in the case of, what was happening on the Hill of the Skull, and what were the Knights Templar up to in Jerusalem 1,000 years ago? And more importantly, what did they find? Or did they find anything? And was it enough to have promoted them to this high-ranking organization that was better than kings and queens and royalty, and only subservient to the Pope himself? Da, da, da. So big words today. So what I think we ought to start off with doing is saying hello to everyone. Hiya. If anyone wants to throw some questions in, that's ace. I haven't managed to. I've been super duper busy this week working on another project, so I haven't had time to come up with a good experiment. So if you're desperately wanting an experiment and you're watching YouTube at the moment,
gone quiet again. I'm pretty sure that it's fine on the other end. Carl, if you can let me know, because he's gone quiet on my end, but I'm pretty sure that's because of this.
It's very hard for me to tell because I'm just speaking. Okay. So yes, if anyone wants a good experiment, then basically head off to YouTube and find part 1 and part 2, because we did some good experiments, and there's way more that I do than those. They're kind of like little introductions to the whole concept. So let's go without further ado into the slides.
Let's go. To the stage.
Here we go.
There we go.
Part 3, the cult of Isis. So that's where we're heading to, deep into Isisician, as it were. So straight on to slide 2, I think, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. So a little bit, basically, of refreshment, what went on in part 1 and part 2. Because it's very important. This whole thing ties together. It's a 3-parter, and they're all interlinked, and they all lead somewhere. So in part 1, essentially, as you can see, we were looking at sacred hills and artificial toot mounds. Now, the toot word is a word that's been adopted, but you find it in names all over the place. So it's not like we've made up this word toot. Near us, there's a Toot Hill, there's a Tutbury. I listed them. You can go onto the old Google and find billions of toots. Anyway, toot mounds are a kind of generic term for anything that's artificial, that's specifically kind of put into the landscape in a sacred way, I shall say. And the thing about toot mounds is when you kind of peel them apart and look inside them, which not many people get to do because they tend to be restricted and sacred and all this kind of stuff. But the thing about toot mounds is that when you kind of do get round to looking inside them, you'll find they're built of layers. And that's very, very important. And we did a little bit of an experiment with layers using tin foil and pieces of paper. And can you remember? I'm going to draw you in here, Jackie. What we found with those layers?
Yeah, we got some results from them, didn't we? Hold on, let me see. Is my toilet roll still here? There we go. So yeah, there we are. I am organised. So yeah, we found that with each layer, you could feel more energy. Well, no, we're not allowed to use that word. So we more heat and more more stuff going on. So there was definitely a resistance there. Some people got resistance, and we also, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but when we put that inside the toilet roll, we found that I found that it was quite claustrophobic. And you said that you didn't actually. You hadn't actually heard that one before, but I did. I felt like it was like enclosed.
Well, you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. So the E word for a start, everyone uses the energy word. And what do we mean by energy? Because it's energy is almost too many things. What we need to home it down to is essentially electromagnetic. So the universe that we live in on a massive scale, the seen and the unseen, and that's important as well if you want to go into the quantum world, into dark matter, all kinds of places, we can reduce it straight back each time into electricity and the component of that magnetism, creating an electromagnetic world and space we live in. And indeed, by piling paper and silver foil up on top of each other, we were mimicking exactly what is going on in these mounds, these sacred places, and indeed in the hills. That's something else that comes to Glacial Till and all kinds of stuff. Look at part 1, basically. But what we found was electromagnetism was building there. And we talked about capacitance, particularly the capacitor effect. And also in there, as you said, caves, burial chambers, they create exactly that same feeling. And funnily enough, you're pretty much the first person or the first group of people that have done the whole toilet roll exercise on. Okay, so what I would expect and what we found with the toilet roll was that we had a build up around the outside, but also a build up on the inside and a kind of flow through and a flow out either side. But what you got, which was very, very interesting, was, like you say, you felt this oppressive kind of nature coming on you. It was quite hard work, and it was probably hitting into, and we did a bit of a checkout on this, hitting into our pineal glands. And our pineals are basically our connection, our antennae, if you like, into the electromagnetic world, and our connection as well into the world of time, real time and otherwise, and also into the world of space, a relative space, sacred space, space around us, connections, if you like, out to the stars, the universe, all kinds of stuff come into here. Now, I could do a whole talk on just that alone. I'm not going to, because this talk is really about something else. But it is totally linked. And that's really, really important. By the way, the picture of the skull there is going to be super duper important, because we found that also skulls themselves were like the burial chambers that we were looking at. They're acting like, if you like, frequency resonators. So they're part of this thing. And if you imagine very quickly, because again, I haven't got time to go into this in massive amounts. If you're standing inside a burial chamber, a sacred space that in itself is a frequency resonator, that is, it generates standing waves, and your skull is a frequency resonator, that is reacting because of the nature of the skull to the electromagnetic energy, the outside, the bony bit. The inside is frequency, it's modulating according to the space you're in, which impacts on your pineal. Okay, that's in a very, very nutshell. If you want to talk on that, I'll do a talk at some point, but we can go in there and do lots of experiments with colanders and silver foil and all kinds of stuff to show exactly how that works. So that was really part one. Can we bomb on to number 3, please? Okay, so what I was really looking at was spaces that were sacred. Spaces that were sacred, you can just about, if you look carefully into there, that's the Hill of the Skull, which we'll be talking about later on. You can just about see some caves in there. And you can see that if you look very carefully and zoom in, you'll see some layers in there as well. So it's like a little layer cake doing exactly what we would expect it to do. And what I proposed earlier on in this talks was that these are places of initiation, amongst other things. They are observatories, they tie into time, they tie into energy, but also, and this is very important, you need to hang on to this because this is going to blow your mind later on. They're places of initiation. So if you stand on the top of one of these spaces, you are connecting, if you like, to the god, the goddess, whatever you want, the universe, the big wide beyond, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. Or you could just simply call it the electromagnetic universe. That's what our connection is up there. And as you found out with the toilet roll, when we go into the caves themselves, we're connecting to the inner, to the chthonic, if you like, to the inner kind of dark, deep-rooted kind of gods, if you like. So what we're getting is an initiation through a process of death, are you going into the cave, and rebirth, coming out of the cave. Now, this isn't, I'm not kind of showing you something totally new. What I'm showing you is something that everyone's known for thousands and thousands of years. It's been documented by many cultures, by many different places, this concept of rebirth, this concept of being reborn as a new self, being initiated into a group, into a cult, into a religion, into whatever. That's really important. This is what these places are absolutely perfect for, because they literally take you there. Does that make sense? They literally take you to where you go. Literally by being there, you're resonating with that energy. So a high priest or a high priestess, quite often high priestesses, because they would connect, would be part of that process. They would take you through the process, but they would also be connecting the process. They would become, if you like, the gods and the goddesses, and you would become the god and the goddesses as part of that initiation role. Okay. That, again, very important. Hang on to that thought. Put that to one side. We're going to come back to it, because in slide 4, this is the next thing we did. We basically examined, last talk, we talked all about the cult of the skull. And we talked all about how skulls have been revered and preserved over literally many thousands of years, going back like 9,000 years and beyond. How they link into stories of continuing, how skulls, for example, have been decapitated by mythological heroes. We've got Gawain and the Green Knight hidden in there, over there. We've got Medusa hidden there. We talked all about St. John the Baptist. And not only are these skulls cut off and revered, and they're kind of kept, if you like, for perpetuity, and I didn't pronounce that properly, but they seem to live on in some way. In all of these stories, they're able to live after death. They're able to prophesize. They're able to tell the owners, the holders, the beholders of these skulls, what is coming up in the future, what to look out for, what to, They're used, as you see in the case of the Medusa, they've been used as weapons. They've been used basically as well magically to bring health and life to the land, going into the Bran story as an example. So all of these kind of associations with the skull over thousands of years, A, they're important. B, the mythology and the legends are from all kinds of parts of the world. So what links them together? Why have we got this? So what we did last time as well, we started to do a little experiment with pictures of skulls. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the thing about pictures of skulls is it's like a sympathetic magic. Although it's a picture, it represents that thing. And if you're in the mindset when you're doing dowsing, when you're doing these kind of experiments, and that representation of becomes in itself the thing that you're representing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we found is lots of skulls, lots of heads in churches, for example. And and I'm pointing at the screen. No one can see what I'm pointing at because I've got a pointer. Models of heads, models of skulls, all of these sort of things they don't just represent that thing, they are that thing. And that is really, really important. Now I can hear some squeaking.
Could be the birds. Don't know.
How are you doing? Excellent. That's fine then. We'll move on from there. So that's quite important. Now, any questions before we carry on?
No, carry on.
No, happy, good. Slide 5.
Okay.
I'm trying to squeeze a huge amount of stuff into yet again an hour, and I'm only introduction a quarter of an hour in. So the other group of people that we started talking about were the Knights Templars. Okay. Now, we spent a while talking about these chaps. Most people recognize the name. Most people have a concept of who or what they are. The Knights Templars, the official story is basically they were established in 1818. They turned up in Jerusalem and said to the king in Jerusalem, can we guard your highways, your byways, the kind of ways, if you like, of the pilgrims? And the king remarkably said yes. Not only that, he gave them room at the inn, room in his palace, which incidentally, quite importantly, of all things, was built in Jerusalem. Get me right, sorry, was built in Jerusalem over King Solomon's palace. Okay, now that's quite important. The other important thing is that there was only 9 of them altogether. And allegedly, these 9 guys turned up and got permission to protect all the pilgrims coming in and out of Jerusalem. And they did this for 9 years. Now, my antennae is kind of buzzing when you read something like that. And when you kind of think that this is it. 9 years worth of all of this stuff. And and the other thing is the contemporary historians, the historians of the time, basically don't mention them. So the guy who was working for the king himself, the King of Jerusalem, who was his official historian, doesn't mention the Knights Templars, doesn't mention that they took up at the King Solomon's temple, that they were in the stables there, doesn't mention that they were parading up and down for 9 years, protecting all the pilgrims, doesn't mention anything else they might have been doing. So, of course, the conspiracy is what was going on. What were they up to? Okay, because that magically, not only did they get this permission to patrol the kind of lands of the Holy Lands, these are sacred lands, by the way, sacred landscape for thousands of years, not just, 2,000 years ago. History is long. But within a very short time of leaving, they were kind of elevated to ranks above kings, above queens. The only person they were subservient to was the Pope. Now, how do you get to do that? Do you know what I mean? You don't get to do that. 9 of you parading yourself around Jerusalem going, hey, guys, I'll protect you. Bear in mind, you're in the middle of the Crusades. We're in the middle of the wars here. Okay, we looked at some pictures a week or two ago. They're throwing heads over walls. It's not a nice kind of gentle kind of battle or anything. They're talking about wading literally knee deep in blood and body parts. Okay, and these guys, these 9 knights, are supposed to be protecting all of the pilgrims coming in. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit suspicious, if you ask me. So what do we really know? Well, last time we found out there were some really important things to find out about them. Before there, I'm just going to kind of go on to slide 6 briefly. As you can imagine, lots of people have kind of made assertions about what they might or might not have been doing. Were they hunting for treasure? Were they hunting for the Grail? Were they hunting for the Ark? Were they looking for all kinds of stuff? And maybe did they find it? Is this why they became so popular and so powerful? Well, last week I talked all about this, and the main problem is, really, let's be honest with you, most of the treasures we're supposedly talking about for the Grail, talk about that in 2 seconds, most of these treasures were like 1,000 years before them. In the meantime, Jerusalem's been invaded by everybody and his dog. Okay, if there was treasures to be found, you'd have thought that the King of Jerusalem might well have located them by then. The Copper Scrolls, which list all the treasures, allegedly, some of the treasures, all the treasures, who knows, were never found until, 50 years ago? They were hidden 70 years AD. So, they weren't around when the Knights Templar were around, so they certainly wouldn't have given them clues. And those are all the clues that we think we know. Ark of the Covenant, well, that's been found everywhere and sent everywhere. Grail, we'll just throw that briefly into the mix. But the Grail basically was actually a story invented by the Templars around about 12-ish AD, 1200 AD. So it's a fairly recent story. It certainly wasn't around when they were looking for the Grail, i.e. they couldn't have been looking for the Grail. If that makes any sense. So we can pull that apart. We can talk about that for aeons and eons and all kinds of stuff. But what we can see around there is that there's lots of kind of sacred places. We're in a sacred landscape. Some of it dates back hundreds of years. Some of it dates back hundreds of years from them. Some of it's more recent, some of it's less recent. There's temples of Aphrodite, Pool of Hezekiah, Church of Anastasia, there's all kinds of places that could be places that they were looking at. And I can give you good reasons why they weren't looking there, good reasons why they might have been looking there. But then there's one little place up the top that might catch your eye. I'm going to leave that hanging. It's a very important place. We're going to come back to it in a second. Can we go on to slide 7, please? Now, this is where it gets interesting. And again, we talked about this last time. Essentially, 1306, what's that? 200 years later. So these guys have had this power for 200 years. Not a few years. Not, until your granddad's around. It's a long, long time. Basically, King Philip, the IV of France, gets a little bit peed off by the Templars by then, because they're way too powerful, and manages essentially to install his own Pope, Pope Clement V, as a Pope. And using this and a few other things, they essentially manage to engineer arresting all of the Templars. Now, some of you are going to go, all of the Templars? In fact, not really. There are a few that got away, but a few were arrested. That's not important. What is important is that they were put on trial. They were tortured, rather than put on trial, I guess, but they were put on trial after being tortured. And one of the things that they mentioned, which was very, 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 very important in our story, this is something you have to hang on to like anybody's business, was how they adored, how they revered, how they venerated a human skull. Or human skulls. Okay. Now, this is okay. They're under duress. They're being tortured. They'll say anything, but they won't say anything. If they were saying anything, it would all differ. Whereas this is stuff that just agrees. And if you notice, these skulls, they treat them like God. They make them riches. They make trees flower. Lands germinate. They talk to them. Do you know what I mean? Sounding a bit pretty much like all of our stories we examined last time about skulls. Making sense? There must be something in this. There must be something there. And this is why I like to do a little bit of science and a little bit of experiment, and why we did some experiment with skulls last time. And we're looking really then at their protective qualities. I haven't figured out a good experiment yet. And I have got a few skulls over there. Can't even see where I put them. They're up on the shelf somewhere. But I haven't got a human skull. So if anyone wants to donate a human skull to the cause, it's a good cause. Scientific. You know what I mean? It would be quite nice to do a few experiments on that. I don't know whether human skulls are particularly better, whether they're particularly better shape or whatever, but they certainly, you know, these were the things they were using. Okay, and that's in itself kind of quite important, really. So I don't know what that is. Sorry, I've got a little button now hanging over there. Let's ignore it. It's not doing anything. Skulls, making them riches, making the lands germinate. As I say, just compare it to all the stories we were talking about earlier on. Brown, you know what I mean. Let's have a look at slide 8, because this is where we were heading to last time, and this is roughly where I stopped. Now, this reliquary, I'm going to call it, or reliquary, never get it pronounced, looks like a head. This was found basically in a Parisian preceptory of the Knights Templars while they were kind of rounding them up. And the interesting thing about this is it's hinged on the top. And when you lift it up, which, by the way, no one bothered to do this until quite recently, there were some head bones wrapped in a cloth, white linen and red linen. And they were labelled Caput, C-A-P-U-T, LV111M, as in Caput 58M. Now, no one knows why or what or which or where. What was this? But the bones themselves, when they were checked out, turned out to be those of a rather small women. Okay, and it turns out that actually various kind of preceptories had different kind of gilt heads, silver heads, whatever, as reliquaries. Now, reliquaries, I'm never going to pronounce that right now. I've pronounced it wrong. And last time we talked all about how the churches did exactly the same thing. Do you know what I mean? It seems that skulls are important. Skulls as opposed to the rest of the body, by the way. We talked last week about, you know, the fact that literally your church, you got the body of St. Peter. Allegedly, this is what they say it is. And what do? They cut the head off, throw the body away, and keep the skull. Da, da, da. So that tells you straight away that skulls are precious, special. And they're precious and special to religious groups. Even the church keeps skulls. And you can go and see them today. If you want to go and tour around, you can go and see them. Some of them are in reliquaries like this. And some of them are literally, you can literally see the bone. I went to an ace place, I'll tell you about it very, very much later, where you can see quite a few skulls. If you go to Paris, by the way, just go down and have a look at the tombs, the catacombs, they're full of skulls. Anyway, basically, this tying into this whole kind of stuff about worshipping skulls, worshipping heads, and the skull matter is inside there. Maybe the skull that was kind of the original skull was broken into pieces and kind of split up between everyone. Who knows? Essentially, it's kind of super duper important. Okay, and we need to hang on to this chapess, this lady, Caput 58M. And we need to figure out what Caput 58M means, because no one, as of yet, has figured it out. Do I know? I have a vague idea, but it's a shot in the dark. I'll tell you about it later. Rightio. So let's go on to slide 9. This is what we really want to hear, isn't it? So let's leave the skulls behind for a second. Let's leave our Knights Templars behind for a second, but don't let go. They're hovering now like shadows in the background. They're like vultures circling. They are going to come into play, and we're going to actually find out possibly what they're up to. But we need to look at something called the cult of Isis. Okay. Now, the cult of Isis, as we understand it, that's relevant to what we want to look at specifically, is a Roman Empire cult. Okay, it's modeled on Elysian cults, and it originated in the 3rd century BCE and went on until about the 1st, possibly 2nd century. So it lasted 300-400 years. Now, that is important. I was thinking about this driving home earlier on, and I thought, ooh, that's rather important. Hold that fact. It is very important, actually, when you start to put, because what we're doing now is we're layering little bits of evidence, okay? We're taking bits that people know, but no one's joined them together yet, because everyone specializes. And the problem about specializing is you don't know all the stuff out of your specialism. Does that make sense? What we need to do is bring stuff together. All kinds of things, dowsing, electricity, all this stuff that we've been talking about, sacred sites. Okay, so the cult of Isis. We don't know much about the cult of Isis, but listen to this. Okay, roughly around about the 1st, 2nd century, a Roman writer described in the book The Golden Ass, which was a fictional book, but nevertheless, it was important. He described how the cult of Isis into symbolic death and rebirth initiations. Did I mention that earlier? I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
They're into doing these in the deepest, darkest depths. Did I mention that earlier? Now, bear in mind, this is kind of, it's a cult that's sprung up in Rome. It's a little bit after Isis herself, but nevertheless. Oh, and it's quite important as well, anointing. Being anointed as a priestess or as a king was important anyway in Roman times. The cult of Isis took it a little bit further. So they had various recipes, which I do have. Again, I could go into those. I could burn some for you if we were doing a proper thing. Cult anointing and smoking incense, all this kind of stuff. So whilst you were going through the death process, you would use something called myrrh. Have you come across myrrh?
Yep.
Whilst it would be included in other things, but myrrh is a goodie. It is a goodie for taking us into that kind of mourning, that death, that kind of dark side. Ooh. Whilst we're coming back to life and we're being anointed, re-anointed, reborn, we'd have a whole kind of different mixture that would include stuff like cinnamon, roses, but most importantly, frankincense. Anyone kind of getting any little kind of niggles in their brain about frankincense and myrrh? Sandarak would come in there. Sandarak, otherwise kind of known as gold. Gold, kind of leaf gold. It's golden, basically. Smells golden. Well, you have to be there. Anyway, so frankincense, gold, and myrrh comes up there. Anointing. It's hang that there. Put that on the old kind of evidence list, if you like. Let's have a little chat about Isis. Because Isis is quite important. Are we still online? Yes, we are. That's absolutely ace. Now, here we go. Isis herself was a goddess of magic, healing, motherhood, hang on to that, and the afterlife. Okay?
Yeah.
With us? Now, here's where it gets rather exciting. In the Lucian writes the Isis mysteries, the priestesses of Isis were called Meri. M-E-R-I. Meri. Ringing any bells?
Yeah.
Mary basically means beloved one. And Mary, if you look around kind of the Roman times, particularly around Jerusalem, anyone who was called Mary, a bit like if you were kind of called Miller, you'd be a Miller, wouldn't you? If you were called Butler, you were going to do lots of bottling. If you were called Mary around then, you were a priestess of Isis. That tells you something. And there would be many, of course, priestesses of Isis because the cult was quite widespread. As we said, taking place underground, a little bit hidden, to say the least, a mystery cult. So are we starting to get somewhere? Okay. I'm going to leave that hanging because hopefully people are starting to think. I've come across a lot of people rejecting this idea because they go, oh, well, there's more than one Mary in the old Bible. That's because there were more than one priestess of Isis. In fact, I showed you a picture earlier on of John the Baptist having his head cut off. His head was cut off on the requests of Salome, who was dancing before Herod, and her grandma was called Mary. So her grandma, priestess of Isis. And she suggested, hey, go and cut his head off. Cut his head off. That's what would do the job. Think about it. We're starting to get into little nuggets, little things. Let's have a look at Mary, because Mary gets rather interesting. Because, again, it's putting all these pieces together. There's no point in saying, well, Mary wasn't Mary because Mary was just a Mary, but Mary wasn't Mary. No, you're on the right page. That's it. Go on to there. You're absolutely good. But I kind of thought, well, who was Mary? Who was Mary? And this is where we start to get really, really exciting now. Mary is one of those kind of proto goddesses, one of those original kind of first goddess kind of persons, if you like. Okay, and you can see a picture of there on her right. And very importantly, I'm not going to go into the symbology because that's a whole another kettle of fish, but she was married to another proto-god, Happy. Okay? Merry and happy. It's sounding a bit like Seven Dwarfs already, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Oh, ho, 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 it's off to Egypt we go. Anyway, Happy, as we can see, depicted, again, a proto-god-ex. I'm going to say God X on purpose here, because if you look carefully at the picture of Happy, Happy has boobies. Okay? Now, as I'm driving home, I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. Happy has tits. And I'm using the word tit on purpose. I'm sorry, I apologize for it. But if we go right back to the beginning of this talk, I was talking about Toot Hills, wasn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And Tutbury, which is a Toot Hill, was also called Titbury. So any hill that is named after the female breast, as in a tit, relates all the way back thousands of years ago to here. This is where we can trace this kind of thing. The landscape represented, we all know about the landscape being the goddess, don't we? Do we? Don't we? Well, if you don't, go and read about it. Jeffrey Leyland, all kinds of people, you can find out about that. And the goddess is represented here, and I say God X on purpose, because the other thing you'll notice is that he, it's meant to be he because it's a partner of Mary, has a nice swollen pregnant. Did we mention pregnancy earlier on to do with Isis? Motherhood? Yeah, okay. Belly. And in the landscape, we can see the landscape as goddess with a whole kind of ability to give, to be reborn. Now, can you see where it's starting to tie in now? We've got a pregnant landscape. We've got a landscape with boobies, tits in it. And we're giving birth. We're having rebirth. Can you see how all of these ideas now start to string together? It can't be a mistake, can it? And the other thing interesting about that, I don't know if you can quite see, it's very hard on a black background. But this is why people are a bit confused with Happy. Happy appears to have a beard. Now, it appears that maybe that beard is a false beard because there's a string around his chin, her chin, whatever. Again, we could do a whole talk all about the whole kind of representation, the Aphrodite, hermaphrodite sort of links in there. We've got growth, we've got fertility. So much so. It's the important thing about the beard is no one has worked out until this second why the Knights Templar all wore beards. Why did the Knights Templar wear beards? And not false beards. They didn't kind of turn up and go, oh, have you forgotten your beard, mister? They all had to wear. That was part of the deal of being a Knights Templar. You had to sport a good, fluffy beard. I think that's why. Basically, we have this whole thing. And if you look in Egyptian, kind of from here, from way back, thousands of years ago, this beard kind of keeps appearing. Look at the pharaohs. They're all depicted with beards. Beards are the thing, which seem to me suggest straight away that the Knights Templars had a little bit of interest, a lot of interest in the Egyptian mysteries, in the cult of Isis, and particularly the basis, the root of the cult of Isis. Now, I found this out by a little bit of hunting. Anyone else could find that out if they're clever enough and put two and two together. Doesn't take much effort. 1,000 years ago, you could still have found this out. Does that make sense? So what I'm doing is I'm going along this little treasure hunt, this little kind of space. Okay. Now, oh, by the way, just before we go on to the next one, Happy lived in a cave. Okay. And the cave, we've talked about caves, haven't we? Cave was at the source of the Nile, the source of, if you like, fertility, the source of water. And water, I haven't done water. I haven't included water. It is part of our electromagnetic circuitry and sacred landscape. I can't talk about that because that'll be another talk. That is actually another talk where we do a whole thing with silver paper and water and stones and all kinds of things. Anyone who's done that talk with me, you'll remember that. I'm happy. It's like our proto kind of God. Caves, titties, pregnant bellies, fertility, basically, happening at the, at the source of the Nile. What more can you want as a kind of source, shall we say, kind of proto-source creation myth there to inspire you and inspire the cult of Isis? Making sense so far? So we have to ask a question, and this is the missing link. It's one of the missing links. If we dive on to the next slide, because the problem is people will make assumptions or affirmations that things didn't happen simply because they haven't kind of figured it out. So the first thing is basically, did the Egyptians, and possibly therefore the old cult of Isis, did they worship or had they, a reverence for skulls? The answer is normally no. But surely we know that Egyptians were, like a lot of other people at that time, before and since, they were into skull elongation as part of their rituals. So we know this. The other thing is we know about them is that essentially during funerary rites, they extracted the most important parts of the body, the heart, because that's where the soul resided, the liver, you name it. The one thing that they, and you might remember this from about 4 weeks ago, the one thing that they didn't keep in their little jars, their canopic jars, do you remember what it was?
The brain.
The brain. They threw it away. Or did they keep the skull because they figured out that the skull is a resonant cavity, that the element of calcium in the skull acts as a electromagnetic conductor? Do you know what I mean? Now we see all this stuff about what's the Indiana Jones, the skull one, Skull of Doom or whatever it is. And we all kind of think, that's a lovely little bit of a joke or a bit of a jake, but hey, if you start thinking about it and look at that picture below there, the skull is, if you like, resonating. It is magical. It's special. It's got to be magical special because, as I say, it's been revered for thousands of years, used in rite, used in ritual. Okay. Now,
crystal skull. That's what it was.
Crystal skull. That was it. Crystal skull.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Something else that's very, very important. And this is really important, as will become even more important in a little bit. Isis. What do we know about Isis? What else do we know about Isis? Well, she had a partner, Osiris. Osiris, to cut the long story short, because it's a huge long story, is absolutely brilliant, was murdered by his brother, Set. And Set essentially cut Osiris's head off. I get them muddled, but it's important. You'll come back to it. He cut Osiris's head off, and then he cut his body into bits and threw everything away. Okay? So we have a little kind of bit of a legend, if you like, there starting to appear. Now, Paul, I can't find his book. It's downstairs. Sorry, I can't reference him. Anyway, I'll reference him in an email or something. You can put it up there. Has done some ace work on linking the head of Osiris to the green man and to all kinds of stuff like that, and how it kind of links into lots of stuff that we find. But the thing about the Osiris story is that essentially, obviously, Isis was a little bit pissed off. So she and her mate, her sister Nefertiti, gathered all his parts, went hunting for them all over the place, and brought them together, and by magic brought him back to life for a very short while. Now, this is important because once he was brought back to life, he essentially, she and him got together for a bit of necrophilic hanky-panky. Okay. More importantly, she gave birth 9 months later. Hey, she gave birth to Horus. Now, Horus obviously had a little bit of a falling out with his mother at a later point, because guess what Horus does to his mother? Cuts her head off. Hey! He cuts her head off, and Thoth comes along, who's one of the other gods. They can't find her head, so he replaces it with a cow's head. So this is why Horus is often represented as a bull-headed goddess, because she's had a... So can you see, heads are important to the Egyptians. More importantly, heads figure at least twice in the Isis mythology. So it would be foolish to say that the Egyptians had nothing to do with heads, skulls, and so forth. Okay, let's dive briefly on to number 12, literally briefly, very, very briefly. I'm just going to mention this in passing. Essentially, I was looking at really the Ankh. The Ankh is kind of symbol of life, symbol of journeying, symbol of the solar journey. I've got, again, another whole talk about the Garden of Eden, all kinds of things to do with the Ankh. But essentially what I did was I took the head off of the Ankh. Now, the Ankh represents, can you see the middle picture on the left, the middle kind of thing, which has got some bits poking out the sides, either side. That's basically called the Jed pillar, and essentially it represents Osiris, and essentially it represents headless Osiris, but it represents his spine. So that's interesting in itself.
Okay.
Now, if you take that and then take its head off and replace it by a bull, you end up with, on the right-hand side, the symbol for Mercury. Okay, and Mercury was basically a hermaphrodite, and Mercury was a child of Hermes and Aphrodite. We talked about that. So little links. I'm exploring these links. I just thought I'd throw those in. It is important, it isn't important. It isn't a major one, but it's an interesting one. Can we go to slide 13, please? I realize I'm halfway through my slides and about 50 minutes through this talk. Okay. Now, that was a rather nice picture. I quite liked that.
I like that. That's cool.
Used for a long time. Okay. And in the Roman period, again, we're heading into Jerusalem. You'll see where I'm coming from in a little bit, maybe in 20 minutes' time. The practice of using caves is documented in Roman times. In the Mishnah, in the Talmud, various kind of writings mentioning, ritual use, witches in caves, caves used for witchcraft, all kinds of stuff. Okay. Ancient Greeks talk about caves. More importantly, the ancient Greeks talk about using skulls as part of the rituals in caves. They also talked about lamps, and it's assumed, and I'm going to kind of maybe jump this slightly, that these lamps would be used to illuminate the skull in such a way that it might cast a shadow, and you could interpret that shadow as speaking to a spirit of the dead, and you can interpret the shadow in ways in which you can get messages. Does that make sense? Maybe it was more than that. Maybe just holding the skull and commute. Anyway, we'll leave that hanging because we've got a resonant chamber, we've got a frequency, we've got the whole thing, we've got tying into the pineal gland, we've got a cave. It's starting to get impressive, isn't it? And I'm having to do it very, very vast because there's so much to this. It's very, very interesting. The question I have to ask is, did the priestesses of Isis, the Meri, if you like, did they practice necromancy? Did they use skulls as part of their rites? And here is where we get slightly unstuck. Okay. For a minute. This is where I got slightly unstuck a while ago, and then I suddenly found out. Anyway, and the other question is, was this what the Knights Templar were looking at for? So bear in mind, the Knights Templar, they've got this obsession with skulls. They are as well obsessed with Mary. And we don't quite know which Mary. And actually, it doesn't matter, because any Mary that they're obsessed with is, as we found out, going to be a priestess of Isis. So we can go into arguments about whether it was the Virgin Mary, whether it was the Mother Mary, whether it was the Mary who kind of anointed Jesus. All of those were the same Mary and different Marys. They were priestesses of Isis. And this is what I think the Knights Templar had found out, whatever. Maybe they were trying to find evidence of this. Who knows? That would certainly be something to go to Pope with and say, hey, Popey, you know, this Mary you've been talking about, this Mother of God, and this, you know, you've had all these kind of conveniences with, you know, various different times. You've kind of raised her. She was just a priestess. Well, not just a priestess. She was a very important priestess, but she was a priestess of Isis. That would be something to kind of stomp on their feet with, wouldn't it? Particularly if you could prove it. So let's go back to the Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, more importantly, at the time of the caves. Slide 14, please. I'm going to rush through this because I could spend 10, 20, 30 minutes on this. Okay. What's important is that, as we said, the Knights Templars hold up in essentially the stables of King Solomon. And the stables of King Solomon are in that square compound to the kind of middle right, and the brown bit at the bottom. And as we say, there's lots of caves. So the Knights Templars are going to spend a while looking around the caves, checking them out. There's Cave of Spirits, which is a very well-known cave. Picture of it down bottom left-hand side. I'm going to jump past these, like I say, very quickly. I haven't got them in there, but there's various tombs. There's a tomb of Mary. There's a tomb of Joseph. There's various tombs around here that could have been important to them, that could have been looking at. Temple, as we say, of Aphrodite. Various pools, various magical springs, all kinds of places. It was a sacred place. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to put it out there because it's very important. Everyone wants a bite of the cherry. Everyone wants to know, wants to own something special. Everyone, for example, wants Arthur to have been born in their county or their town. Is that correct? And you go to any talk on Arthur and you'll find that he's pretty much been everywhere and done everyone. And I say that in a good sense. Same thing goes for Robin Hood. Do you know what I mean? Robin Hood, we've got a Robin Hood in Tetbury. I've even found his grave. That's another talk. That's exciting, that is. I say me and my mate found his grave. That's kind of cool. That's another story. But the point is, people like to have ownership. Go to Glastonbury. You'll find the grave of, I think, of King Arthur and Guinevere there or whatever. The point is, people are prone to make things up, exaggerate a little bit. So Jerusalem at that time, people would have wanted in on the story. Do you know what I mean? Christians. Yeah. Where did he have his last supper? Okay. Where was he crucified? Where was he born? All this sort of thing, you know. Where did he used to go to the toilet? Anything is stuff like that. And I'm saying that with great reverence because, of course, what we're going to find out something a little bit kind of, you know, he might not have been the Son of God. Did I say that out loud? Oh, dear me. Now, if you look around Jerusalem, you will find several places that could well be, you know, good candidates for where he was crucified. Now, bear in mind, let's think about the crucifixion. We're talking about a death. He's then taken into a cave and he's reborn 3 days later. And he gets to see Gabriel. Gabriel's very important. I'm not going to speak about Gabriel. Again, another story, another hour worth of chatting about Gabriel and what she does and how she fits into everything. Very complicated. But nevertheless, I'm kind of proposing that, funnily enough, at the top there, we see something called Skull Hill. It's been called Skull Hill for ever. Golgotha is the name you'll probably recognize. Calvary is another name you'll recognize. And if you look to the left, just there, you will see that hill. We've been talking about it for the last 3 weeks. Can you see it? You can find it if you like. I'm on the previous slides. The problem is with that hill, it's a bit desecrated. Everyone says it's called Skull Hill because it looks like a skull. Does it look like a skull to you?
Yeah.
Possibly, with a stretch of imagination. What if it was called Skull Hill because initiation rites were practiced, cult of Isis, all that sort of stuff? And we know from writings, we do know this, we know that the whole concept of using skulls in caves was a thing because it was banned. Now, let's dive down to slide 15. Okay. Going to leave that in front of you just for a second, because if you can imagine the landscape 1,000 years later in Jerusalem, okay, the major problem is everything's probably disappeared. Okay. Now, what they did find around Skull Hill that we saw on the previous slide was a number of pottery, particularly lamps. Have we talked about lamps? Have we mentioned lamps? We talked about lamps earlier on, didn't we? Now,
yeah,
Isis, and I've gone and rubbed this out and thrown it off somewhere, was named basically, she was goddess of the lamp, goddess of the flame, keeper of the lamp. She was the lamp person. If you wanted to invoke a goddess of lamps like a genie, she was the one to go to. Does that make sense? So she's starting to appear here, just not in the form that we're looking from. So we knew that that there was lamps near this place. But the problem is, obviously, no skulls have been found. And in all honesty, no skulls would have been found. And I'll tell you why. This is why people won't make the link. The Roman Empire basically banned, and I just mentioned it, necromancy. Okay, roughly round about AD 132 to 136. Okay. What happened to all the people who were banned? They went away. They went somewhere else to practice. Okay. And it would feel as though the trail might well go cold. Now, if you remember, we talked about the cult of Isis. And the funny thing is, the cult of Isis roughly disappeared around that time as well. Isn't that a strange thing? So you imagine you're a young Knights Templar, you're looking for a skull, and maybe you find some information, maybe you're looking for some stuff, but it's all got a bit cold. Or has it? Now, the Tiamin Cave. Let me tell you about this, because this is one of the big clinchers. Okay. Now, when I say it was discovered, obviously people have known about and used this cave for a long, long time. Okay. But we tend to talk about discovery when we talk about essentially the kind of, the archaeologists finding it, basically. Now, this cave has been called the Cave of the Mother of Twins. It is a magical cave. People who've kind of been in and out of that cave for centuries have kind of seen this as a very special place. Now, archaeologists found some things in that cave. Can you guess what they found in the cave?
Skulls.
Skulls! They did indeed. And can you guess what else they found in the cave?
Lamps.
Yay!
Oh God, I'm getting good at this.
This cave is a few miles outside of Jerusalem. So here's the clincher. This is what I'm really loving now. They've dated, because they do that, don't they? They've kind of dated it back to about 130 AD. Okay. So what we know is now that the old cult of Isis disappeared around about 130 AD. Simultaneously, so did the people who were doing the old caves and skulls stuff. The caves and skulls guys just moved out of town, about 15 miles away. And here's the evidence. This is real live evidence that I've basically come across this, and archaeologists have gone, oh yes, well, we know therefore that there must have been some kind of cult going on here that worshipped skulls and worshipped, and did something with lamps and things. Now, I went to a ceremony in the local cathedral, Lichfield Cathedral, a few years ago, and it was absolutely beautiful. And the ceremony started with the lighting of one single candle, and it is very dark in there. And slowly but surely, more candles were lit until the whole of the outside of the cathedral, where we're all sitting in the center, was lit by all these candles. It was the rebirth of the sun. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Now imagine bringing a skull into that in a cave. It's not about shadows and flickerings. It's about the birth of the sun, the rebirth, the death and rebirth. We know what it's about now. And the skull is symbolic of that. The skull is very important. And as I said, Isis is literally known as the lady or mistress of the flame. Okay. Now I'm going to dive in. Here's the big question. Let's go on to the next slide very briefly, because we're pretty much at the end now, which isn't too bad for me. Did the Knights Templar, were they aware of this? Is this enough information? I'm not too sure, but it's certainly a lot of information. If they could prove or show that there was that the priestess of Isis was called Mary, okay, and the initiation, death, rebirth that happened on that Calvary Hill was actually an initiation into a cult by a sacred priestess. Now we know that Christos means the anointed one, so that's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it? Okay, we know all about anointing. We know that's part of the cult of Isis, so we're not kind of throwing one there. We know that skulls were used in all kinds of manners, including themselves to bring people back to life as part of life, death, rebirth situations, rituals, ceremonies. Okay. The Bible talks many times about anointing, particularly Jesus. Talks about initiations, deaths on Golgotha. Talks about Mary many times and what she got up to. Read it, reread it in this little kind of thing there. Okay. Now, Caput 58M basically begins with Ka. And Ka in Egyptian funeral texts is basically the vital essence of the body. That's interesting, isn't it? Ba is the personality. And another word that came up in the kind of when they were being tortured was Baphomet. So I'm kind of guessing, and I might be absolutely wrong, but maybe Caput is a little bit of a kind of link into Ka, the double, the vital essence, the essence of whoever the skull belonged to, the essence of Mary, the essence of the priestess, because it was a female, if you remember. 58M. 58 is interesting. There's a game I've tried researching. I've done a lot of looking to try and find this. There's a game in Egyptian, a very old, probably 2,000 years old kind of game, maybe 1,000 years old, who knows, with 58 holes in the game. And it's like snakes and ladders. And you have to basically, to win it, you have to get to the Ankh, the life. So that's interesting. Or is it not? I don't know. Let's dive into number 17. Okay. So we're pretty much now at the end of the talk, and we're just going to throw some random stuff at you. That's very important. So we've got our kind of evidence laid out now on the table. Hopefully, it's kind of pointing that the Knights Templar knew and had found out, or maybe used, the information that Mary was a priestess of Isis, and the whole kind of thing about, being on a cross and going into the cave was part of an initiation rite. There's lots of information about that. And that maybe they found this skull at the caves and said, hey guys, look at this skull. What does this show you? It didn't die out when you told us it had. It didn't disappear. Yeah. It actually carried on going. We have evidence. I don't know personally if that's it. I don't know if that's enough to persuade a pope that you're greater than anyone. Is it enough blackmail, shall we say, kind of leverage that much power? Maybe. Maybe not. I'm going to talk very, very quickly about the Skull of Sidon, if you don't mind now. If you want to go home because you've done your hour, you can go home because you've got the basis of it. But this is another little lovely thing. The Skull of Sidon is a little bit of story. Now, you'll recognize the story, but essentially, the Lord of Sidon was in love. Unfortunately, the person he was in love with died. And he was a bit, bit heartbroken. So heartbroken that he thought he'd turn up at her grave, dig her body up, and have his naughty way with her. That's what you do when you grieve, don't you? Anyway. Why not? Thing is, of course, it didn't just that was the end of the story, because it wouldn't make a good story, no. And what really happened was the big voice came out of the grave when he'd finished his doings and said, right, now you've done that, come back in 9 months' time. So to cut a long story short, 9 months later, he comes back, opens up the grave again, and guess what he finds?
Baby.
You'd think he'd find a baby. He doesn't. He finds a skull and crossbones. So basically a skull lying beneath the bones, between the bones of her, below her pelvis. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
You never get the skull and crossbones myth. Now, the funny thing about this story was it's probably a little bit older than 1,000 years old. However, it was adopted by the Knights Templar. And the Knights Templar turned it into a Knights Templar story. Okay. Later on, it gets passed on in mythology into various other cults, various other secret societies, including the Masons. So anyone who's a Mason out there might well recognize the story of the Skull of Sidon, or they might well have gone through some kind of ritual that involved rebirth, death, and a skull. So what we're finding, even now, even today, someone will have encountered that within the Masonics, within the Masons, and have been through that ritual where you go into a dark place representing a cave, where you confront your death and rebirth through a skull, where you, shall we say, meditate, where you focus on this and get some guidance. Does that ring any bells to anyone? Oh, hiya. Hello, Alex. And Alex, anyway, we know who Alex is. I've forgotten his name already.
Alex. His name's Alex.
Yeah, but it's something else as well.
It's Alex. No, it's Alex.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being, very famous authors joining us there, Alex from there. Essentially, this is starting. Can you see the links we're starting to get?
Yeah.
Think about the tale of Osiris and Isis. Again, birth through death, literal birth, magical, shall we say, child. All kind of ringing, lots of bells, isn't it? I hope it is anyway. I'm going to jump because I've got loads more stuff written. Can we go on to slide 18 for about 10 seconds? Slide 18 is the Dome of the Rock. This is slap bang in the middle of King Solomon's Temple. This is what we see now. And again, we're talking about domes. We're talking about boobies. Can you see the representation? We're talking about pregnant tummies. Can you see the representation? And I'm not making that up. I'm not saying it looks like, okay, because essentially this place, underneath it is a cave, and it's a very special cave because it is seen as the origin of the world. It's where the world was created. Literally, the belly button. This is their terms, not mine. The belly button, the omphalos of the world. This is what this represents. Okay, this is why it's built. This is why it's shaped like that. It is literally that pregnant, that whatever, that sucker, that fertile piece of land built there in the middle of the King Solomon Temple, where the Knights Templar were there before. Is that interesting or not? I'm going to dive on. I've got loads written about that, but I'm not going to go into it. Slide 19. This is interesting. Very quickly, essentially, art since at least the 16th century, possibly before, Mary seems to have been represented Mary Magdalene, by the way, with a skull. What did they know? What had they found out in the 16th century? What? Why? It's not a normal thing to do. Oh, yeah, we'll grab this really important woman out of Christianity and we draw pictures of her with skulls. Okay? And if you look at those pictures, those skulls, you know, she's contemplating, she's holding, she's linking in, she's affirming. In one of them, you can see, you know, plants growing out, all kinds of stuff. We link in future into green men. We're not going to go there. We haven't got time. Let's dive on to slide 20 very quickly. Slide 20. That's another 5-10 minutes. Sorry. But basically, this is Crowley's Lust, picture of lust. And it's talking again all about the Magdalene, Mary Magdalene, with healing balm, and she's the true dame, the true lady of the cross. And we get kind of the rose and hidden things coming out of there. I'm not going to go there. That's another talk. Let's jump on to slide 21 because this is a thought. Okay. Now this is a very famous scene. A child is born to Mary. Gifts are brought. We mentioned the gifts: gold, myrrh, frankincense, all that stuff. Now, what if this is the end of the story, not the beginning of the story? So we talked about pregnancy several times. I've mentioned pregnancy. I've mentioned pregnant hills. I'm going to come on to those in a minute, pregnant hills. What if, and this is something that, you know, you find in the Da Vinci Code, what if that Mary and Jesus got together and this is actually the creation of the next line? I'm not going to go further, but what I could also say is it could be both. If we're looking at lineage, we've already seen that we can find Mary tracing back. Mary as a priestess, it isn't unusual. It wouldn't be unusual or odd for her also to be a mother and that to be important, as well as an initiator, and for her to give birth. Now, to me, it doesn't matter. What it is showing is that is a potential. And anyone armed with that information or with that evidence that we've kind of been looking at over the last hour might be able to use that to their advantage. Does that make sense? It's opening doors. It's putting questions out there. Now, the Da Vinci Code went way further. Part of me, you know, I don't know what to think. The thing about the Da Vinci Code essentially was it's based on the Holy Blood, the Holy Grail. The Holy Blood, the Holy Grail was very well researched, but they came to the same conclusion about bloodlines, and they tried to trace them up into modern times. I've got a number of friends who can trace their heritage, if you like, backwards to various times, and it gets very interesting. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to dispute it, and I'm not going to prove it. I can simply say that that's a thing. It's an interesting thing. Can we go to 22, please? Now, I spent a little while hunting around trying to find, because I found lots of skulls, hills that were named after skulls and hills that were named after toots, tuts, or tits. But trying to find pregnant hills, belly hills, was slightly harder. Map tour you might have come across in the Peak District was called Belly Hill. Is it on there? I think it is. I haven't got to the slide myself. But anyway, essentially that was found. Skulls were found in there. There's interesting, isn't it? Belly Hill with skulls in it. Another Belly Hill with skulls in it there is Göbekli Tepe. Go and read about it. It's in the news at the moment because it's, again, one of these places that goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. It's got so much archaeology in there, so many things going on. But it is literally called Belly Hill in Turkish. And again, as you can see at the bottom, skulls, models of heads, all kinds of stuff found there. So there's obviously a cult of a skull going on. Now, no one yet has got interested in the cult of the skull at Göbekli Tepe. They might do when they see this. They might go and claim their research and go, well, I already knew that anyway, Stephen. They might not. They might just go, oh, Steve, you found it. That's really ace. Okay. The point is, every time I think I've completed the cycle, every time I think I've kind of got to the end, I haven't, because it goes on and on. Let's go to the final last slide. Now, going to talk very briefly. Can you see on the left-hand side Harriet? I don't know if you can see. Harriet, I found the other weekend. We had a little wander around the Museum of Witchcraft at Boscastle. Simon very generously gave us a private viewing in there. I'm not going to go into that, but that's quite interesting. And there were quite a number of skulls in there, by the way. If you want to go and find some skulls in England, go there. Harriet, basically, oh gosh, try and cut it down. She's found in a Bible box in the rubble of a London church, basically, which was bombed in the Second World War. Now, the guy who ran the place made up this story about her being a murderer, him and being a murderer in various cases. Turns out that he is a she. Turns out that the wrappings around her head aren't from a kind of medieval thing or a more modern thing. They date back to 300 BC. Ringing any bells? They date back to ancient Egypt. And they are indeed ancient Egypt wrappings. So sitting in there, I found this pigging skull of Harriet, who was an ancient Egyptian. There she is. Now, here's my idea. Basically, as I say, the Knights Templar find out some information. Maybe they find out way more than I found out. Maybe they're a bit cleverer than that. They certainly had skulls. They certainly worshipped skulls. They worshipped Mary. There's all, as you can see from the last 3 talks, there's lots and lots of stuff linking them into landscape, into sacred landscape, into skulls, into the cult of Isis. Enough, I think, for them certainly to have a little bit of sway. If they had the right thing in their hands at the right time, they could turn to any pope and say, hey, mate, who's the boss of you then? Do you know what I mean? And just to make sure, what do? They leave lots of clues all over the place. Here are some clues I found in my local church, which is approximately 500 yards away. Skulls. Heads, rather. Heads on the windows. We talked about those last week. Top right-hand corner, can you see those 3 Marys? They are 3 Marys. It's St. Mary's Church, and yet there are 3 Marys on the door, not 1. Interesting. Tell me about it. Bottom down there, we can see a crusader with his, essentially with a grail. Woo! Middle there, you can see a good Knights Templar grave. Yeah, you can find that in our church if you know where to look. And on the left there, the Green Man. So the Knights Templar linked into the landscape, into the sacred landscape, come back to England as part of, their return from the Crusades. They understand all about landscape and all about sacred because they've been over in the place where, everyone knew about that. I'm not this long story, another story. But essentially they came back, and as part of their kind of lookings, they find these sacred mounds, sacred places. Some of them already have churches on them, Saxon churches that have been built there because of the understanding. So they come along and built these great big edifices. And within these edifices, they code, they tell us their secret. They tell us the secret that for example, cross of theirs is derived essentially from the Egyptian ankh when you work it out. They tell us about Mary's. They don't just put 1 up there. They tell us there's more than 1, just in case we haven't got it. They tell us it's linked into green men. They tell us it's linked into grails. Well, they made the grail story up, but anyway, that's another story. Tell us it's linked to heads, skulls. Do you know what I mean? That would be enough for someone to go, oh, poo, they've told everyone now. Best let them get on with it. Do you know what I mean? They've left all the clues. Until 300 years later, everyone's forgotten a little bit about it. The clues are still there, but everyone's forgotten the code. So it's time now for the Pope to be replaced and for the Templars to be replaced. But of course, they go to the land and they carry on doing what they were doing. That in itself is another story. For another time.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Brilliant. Oh, wow. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Good. Anybody got any questions while we're here? We'll just put it over to the audience. Has anybody got anything they would like to ask? Yes. Wow, that was so cool. So, yeah. I'm off. Now I just want to go and, wander around churches and things even more now, because once you know something, you can't not know it, if you know. It's correct? So you kind of, I'll be searching for other things that I didn't before.
It is absolutely true. You can find green men all over the place. You can find skulls, heads all over the place. You can find dragons symbolizing the. We could debate this for a whole day. More than that, Carl. We could get together for a week and talk all about this, couldn't we? You can find dragons all over the place. Mary's all over. You name it. It's there.
Yeah.
And it's there in front of us in stone. It's kind of hidden in plain sight. And the code is there to see. And it's like I say, once you put those pieces together, I feel that it's kind of led me down this path of going, it all came from going round a church to just check out some stuff that I'd written about a year or two when we were first looking at sacred landscape. And I've gone over to this church to go, okay, I just need some more photographs. And I'm wandering around the outside thinking, why is there so many skulls? Why is there so many heads? What's this all about? Oh, I'll write a few sentences about that. I'll just look into the cult of the skull for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Down the rabbit hole you go. Yeah.
And there's the problem. There are many, many, many rabbit holes. And there's much to be found that I haven't included. And that's the thing. It's a wealth. It's a mine of information. And like I say, what I'm presenting really is information. I'm presenting evidence in terms of factual things that, I found out. They're not kind of things I've made up. What I create is the narration around the outside that I think puts it all together. But what you can certainly do is, if you start with those pieces, where else are you going to end?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you could just go on forever, can't you?
Yeah.
It's mad. Well, with everything, you can never, ever stop learning when you start going towards, anything, occult or anything really. Once you start with one thing, it just leads on to so many other things. And yeah, it's crazy. That's particularly why I put this channel up, because there's just so much good stuff out there that people, it's just really good for everybody to know some, know some.
Al and I were looking at sacred landscape about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, as a result of, many more years of looking. And we kind of decided that we would limit ourselves very specifically to the river dove, and very specifically the dove in our area, so about a 20-mile length, because there's so much information we're getting out of one place. How, what do you do with that information? And actually all the information that we're finding reflects into all kinds of other sacred sites. It's like a model for other sacred sites. But yes, you have to kind of stop yourself going down too many rabbit holes. Like I say, we've ended up in Robin Hood land. We've ended up in the land of Druids. We've ended up in Knights Templar. We've ended up in medieval kind of minstrel galleries, all kinds of stuff that all link together, all continuously linked together. And this is why every time we find a link, it kind of ties back to the original link. It's another thread. It's not a separate thing. It is part of the whole. And that's what we find. And that's what people don't do. They don't look at things holistically. They tend to look at the individual cases. People will look at, for example, the whole Mary thing. And they'll be going, well, Mary just means, okay, if it means priestess, hey, which Mary was the priestess? That's the argument I've come across. And the answer is, well, they all were simple, It's a title, exactly like Christos is a title. It's not his surname, it's a title. Miller tells you about the job. Butler tells you about the job. Do you know what I mean? Mary tells you about the job, the role she had. Yeah. And if you were a priestess of Isis, and your title was Mary, you'd be pretty teed off at anyone else using the name who wasn't a priestess of Isis. And we have to look at the cultures and where things are working. And the fact that we find they disappear 100 years, after this monumental event in the Bible, and simultaneously these skulls start kind of being moved into caves, and the whole kind of thing is banned, disappears. It kind of, everything's stacked on top of each other. Everything's linked, I think. That's my observation.
Yeah, for sure. And when we were talking about the skulls and stuff, and I just remembered a program that I was watching. I don't know, it was Netflix or Amazon or something, and it was really cool. He was like was he a psychic or a magician or something? And he had this skull, and basically this skull, the essence of the skull comes out, and he helps him with his stuff and all that sort of thing. And it had and there's just all these symbolism comes out in each episode, and it's quite cool. But that kind of reminds me of that, and I thought, oh yeah.
The thing is, we have this kind of memory, this Jungian kind of memory that's an ongoing, a memory that's passed down from person to person, not in terms of spoken about, not in terms of that kind of thing, but seems to be stored in the DNA. Okay. And it's a racial memory that's kind of carried through generations. It's kept intact. If you come to, we're doing a sacred landscape conference again this year. Crichton Miller's going to be talking all about this and how different kind of parts of the landscape, different places we go to, prompt these memories to come back. They're like stores, they're like codes, they're there for a reason. People have put them there so that we don't forget. It's very important when we come down to it. The big story is us and the land are one. That's the whole, if you remember the Arthurian Excalibur film, what is us and the land are one. And we need to work with the land. We need to be part of it. And we need to understand why we're the one. And this is why I do all the science and all the tests and all the checks and why we resonate literally with the land. Therefore, why the skull becomes important after life to resonate with the land.
Cool. Yeah. Well, that's a brilliant finish. Thank you so much. This has given me a lot to think about, as usual. And you've given me lots of funny bits to put in the YouTube shorts tomorrow, so look out for them. Lots of titties and things coming up tomorrow. Right then. Yes, thank you so much once again. And yes, and that was part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, I will try and remember and put the links to part 1 and part 2 in the description below. Once again, thank you, Steve, for a fantastic talk. It was marvelous. And obviously, I would love you to come back on again at some point once you found some more rabbit holes to come and entice us with. Please let me know.
There are many. I'm making a list at the moment of all the rabbit holes.
Oh, fantastic. You'll be the star of the year.
No, we just need to sell the book. I need to write the book first, of course, but you know.
Well, that'd be a good idea. Get your book out. Come on. I want to be first to have it on my channel that you've just written a book. Right. There you go. You're writing a book. Okay. Right. Lovely to see you again. And please do let me know if you're going to do another talk. And we'll see you again. And I'll have a little chat after. All right.
Thanks,
see you soon. Thank you. Bye for now. Bye. Well, wasn't that amazing? That was so interesting. Oh yes, thank you. Yeah, that was really cool. Now it's given me loads of things to think about. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us again this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you all on. If you're watching this later, please do like and subscribe to the channel because it helps us to carry on and do some more brilliant talks. So please do like, subscribe, share with all your friends. Please let everybody know. And as you know, I am the founder of the Magic Toolbox UK. If you ever need any magical tools, banners, anything like that, then come and give us a shout. Magic Toolbox UK. What else have I got to say? Yes. Oh, yes. Don't forget. So next Thursday, the 24th, I think it is, we are having a lovely talk all about druids. So we haven't had a talk about druids, so that'll be interesting. And that is going to be by Finian Heavey. So please do come and join me then. It would be absolutely fantastic if you come and join me. I will leave all of the information will be on there coming up on the YouTube. You'll see it will pop up. and I'll do it all over Facebook and whatnot. So I shall see you all again soon next week. I'm not really getting any breaks, am I? There you go. Next week on the Monthly Mystical. All right. Have a lovely evening. Love you lots. All right. See you all then. Bye. Bye for now.